If we follow the paths of the bullets that struck Robert Kennedy, they seem to point not to Sirhan, but to an assassin directly behind and to the right of the senator. Though the police initially claimed that there were no other guns drawn in the pantry, there was a person directly behind Robert Kennedy, to his right, with a gun drawn. Scott Enyart saw him.
Getting up off the floor, he had his weapon out.
Suspicion directed at Thane Eugene Caesar, an employee of a security service, is not new. It was the central thesis of Ted Chirac's groundbreaking 1973 film documentary, The Second Gun. According to his own testimony, Caesar was a last-minute recruit for duty at the Ambassador that night. He had worked for Ace for less than a week. Caesar has admitted that he had his gun drawn that night, but he says he never fired it. But another witness, journalist Don Schulman, claimed to a radio reporter immediately after the murder that he saw Caesar fire his gun.
I was in the pantryway following the senator. He stopped and shook hands with several people and started to progress again. We were packed in there like sardines. There were lights and cameras and people and a lot of excitement. The senator just finished shaking hands with someone, and another man, I think it was the maitre d', walked up and took his hand. As we were slowly pushed forward, another man stepped out and he shot. Just then the guard who was standing behind Kennedy took out his gun and he fired also. The next thing I knew is that Kennedy was shot 3 times.
Now, how far was Sirhan from Senator Kennedy at the time?
I would say approximately from 3 to 6 feet.
Where was this guard who was firing his gun?
He was standing directly to the side and back of Kennedy.
On what side?
He was standing on the right-hand side.
Now, Don, did you tell this story to any police authorities?
I told the story to several different people, including several police authorities. Right after it happened, I insisted the senator was shot 3 times. I was told by the police.
Which police?
Well, I was told by the FBI that I was told by the FBI, my own news people, that I was mistaken, that I was wrong. The senator was only shot twice.
Now, when you say your own news people, who do you mean?
Well, I was on the air with Jerry Dunphy. Also, I did a tape recording with Jeff Brent. And several people I told. In fact, I also told them that the guard pulled out the gun, and everyone told me that in the confusion I didn't see what I saw.
And I definitely wouldn't have voted for Bobby Kennedy because he had the same ideas as John did, and I think John sold the country down the road. He gave it to the commies, he gave it to whoever he wanted to, he literally gave it to the minority. He says, here, this is, you take over. I'm giving it to you. You run the white man. Nobody should be run. I'm not saying that the white should be the slave to the black or the black the slave to the white, but he turned the pendulum too far the other way. I'm not a Democrat.
Oh. Yeah.
So it had nothing to do with that. I was going down there just for the money.
Now, who did you vote for in November?
Wallace.
Pardon me?
George Wallace. The people in Europe, I don't care where you go, hate our guts.
They do?
They hate us. They'd like to stick a knife in our back. And want to know why? Because they're tired of us giving them everything. So they've had it crammed down their throat for so many years. It's just like the black man. The black man now, for the last 4 to 8 years, has been cramming this integrated idea down our throat, and so you've learned to hate them. And one of these days, at the rate they're going, there's going to be civil war in this country. It's going to be the white against the black, and the only thing I have to say is the black will never win.
Was it possible for Sirhan to get behind you and behind Senator Kennedy and shoot from behind?
No, this was completely impossible because Sirhan was in front of me and he didn't have no way to go behind me, to come behind me, to shoot from behind me.
Did you see any security guards in that kitchen pantry?
There was a security man somewhere behind me. I don't know how far away from me.
On what side?
I somewhere around right on the left side, you know, right behind Kennedy, somewhere around there.
We also know, I've found this in the files recently, that various parts of the hotel were guarded by different guards. Thane Eugene Caesar was one of several guards hired by the hotel through a security. A security had like 8 or 10 guys there that night. And different guards were being very good at their posts and checking people's ID and only letting certain people in. But for whatever reason, the kitchen was constantly unguarded, and one of the Kennedy staffers is complaining to the police in the files about how she had to keep shooing people out of the kitchen. No one was supposed to be there except press people, or certainly Robert Kennedy and his immediate, attendants. But the person who was charged with guarding the kitchen door was Thane Eugene Caesar. So, I mean, if you wanted to have a guy, in there to make sure Sirhan got into the room, because frankly, if your patsy doesn't get in the pantry, the whole plot is off, right? You got to get him into the pantry, and the only way to do that is to make sure whoever's guarding the room is going to let him in. So I find it really interesting that Thane Eugene Caesar was the guard stationed at the kitchen that night.
When I got to the police station, I noticed I lost my tie, and I figured, I figured when I got knocked down is when it got knocked off. Well, so when they took me back to the hotel, I went into the kitchen area, and the sheriff was still there. There was 3 or 4 of them in there. They were looking for bullets, because there was
While the circumstantial evidence against Caesar is strong, it should also be mentioned that there are reliable reports of other guns in the pantry. Dr. Philip Melanson is the director of the RFK Assassination Archives at the University of Massachusetts, and he has investigated these reports.
To date, there have been 4 witnesses whose accounts seem credible to me, who have talked about seeing a man in plain clothes with a gun in the pantry. And 3 of those 4 witnesses allege that such a gun was fired in proximity to Kennedy.
Since there were no Secret Service men present in the pantry, these reports have sinister implications.
As Sirhan stepped out and fired at the senator, as he was going down, I saw many guns being pulled out. And one gun was pulled out by a security guard, and it was fired. And that's what I saw.
Could there have been more than one shooter involved in the 1968 assassination of Senator Robert F. Kennedy? RFK was shot in Los Angeles shortly after claiming victory in California's Democratic primary. The shooter, Sirhan, is serving a life sentence for the assassination, but at a forensics conference this weekend in Connecticut, new theories he might not have fired the fatal shots. Is that possible? Amy Parmenter from NBC station WVIT in Hartford was there. Amy, what led experts to this theory?
Well, actually, it was a very interesting theory that was presented yesterday at this symposium, presented by a couple of scientists. So, of course, it was rather complicated and detailed. I'm going to try to simplify it for you a little bit. The scientists, 2 independent researchers, Dr. Robert Joling and Philip von Prague, forensic evidence experts, actually had been studying the Kennedy assassination separately. They never even met until last year when they met at a seminar and realized that their independent conclusions were almost perfectly matched. Now, Joling, what he was able to come up with by studying the forensics evidence was that Sirhan could not have fired the fatal shot, and that's because, according to his findings, that fatal shot came from behind Senator Kennedy. And of course, witnesses all put Sirhan face to face with Kennedy, about 4 to 6 feet away, so he would not have had the opportunity to shoot from behind. Now, von Prague, what he studied was a little more complicated. He actually looked at the audio recording known as the Prushinsky recording, which was made by a Canadian journalist, actually inadvertently, who had left his tape recording on after recording Kennedy's victory speech. And then as he kind of followed the Kennedy entourage into the kitchen pantry there at the Ambassador Hotel, the tape was still rolling, when the gunfire broke out. So von Prague analyzed that audio tape, and what he determined was that there were at least 13 gunshots. Now, that's interesting because Sirhan had a revolver that only held 8 bullets. So where did those 5 other shots come from? And he was able to match some of the gunshots on that tape that actually resonated differently than the gunshots from Sirhan's bullet to another gun. And that was a gun that was actually owned by one of the security guards on the Kennedy detail. When that security guard was asked about owning this gun, at first he admitted, yes, I owned that kind of gun, but I got rid of it 2 months before the assassination. Well, it turns out, upon further investigation, in fact, he did not get rid of that gun until 5 months after the shooting. And of course, you can see where we're going with this, and that is the fact that that security guard was in fact behind Senator Kennedy, when the fatal shot was fired.
Okay, fascinating. Amy, great job. Thank you very much. It's certainly a complicated story.